Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 200.
But it also goes back to my point of everybody's doing it their own way. There is no cohesive approach. There's no commonality across a lot of these devices. And you never know what you're going to get until you dig into the docs or until you set it up and see just how bad it really is.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Well, Lee, thanks for joining me again. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For those who don't know you, kind of explain what you do, where you are in the world of Wi-Fi, and what you're up to these days.
I work for Syracuse University. I'm the campus wireless network architect. I have been in the networking game for 22 years. Background is, Air Force avionics radar systems prior to that, and then, day one for Wi-Fi on. So I've been doing this for quite a while. Wireless isn't all I do, but it does consume a lot of my time. And then on the side, I do quite a bit of writing for various outlets and just for fun.
If someone kind of wants to follow up, obviously you're active on Twitter as well. How do people get in touch with you? And of course, we'll put links to this in the show notes.
Sure. So on Twitter, I am at WiredNot, all one word, no spaces, no underscore, no anything. At WiredNot, I blog for IT Toolbox, Search Networking, and others, but those are the two primary outlets these days. And my own blog is at wirednot.wordpress.com.
Real world frustrations with consumer gadgets. What instigated this talk? What motivated you to share this?
Well, this is one of those, I think it's a very relatable topic. And I think it's one of those things where the more enterprisey you are, probably the more sensitive you are to it. Like if you're doing a lot of SMB where maybe the network equals, a small router with a built-in access point or, something simple, you're probably not hit by the effect of the topic as hard as like the enterprise folks. But you have, business networks, and business networks, are made of, built on solutions which enforce policies, and usually policies are arrived at with the intent of, business continuity and smooth operations and stability and such. And it's really strange on the Ethernet side of the house. There's not a lot of mystery to Ethernet devices generally. They just they plug in. Occasionally they get firmware upgrades. Every now and then you get one that's built kind of wonky, but by and large, it's a fairly predictable space. Whereas on the wired side, when we get into 802.11, even though we have standards and even though we have the Wi-Fi Alliance promising us interoperability, it's just absolute chaos, the client space. And it's very unpredictable. Once you get away from laptops and smartphones, even then they can be their own challenge. But by and large, you can make them work. You might have to do a driver update or whatever. But then there's all these other bizarre, weird devices with wireless networking capabilities that do wonderful, magical things in the living room. And then people drag them to work expecting the same wonderful magic, and it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
How does this issue hit you particularly hard in the university environment? Do you think it's harder for you, or is this probably the same for everybody?
I think everybody is going to have their own variation of it. A lot of it depends on what your strategy is and how much you think you must accommodate all devices, and whether you can actually say no to certain devices or whatever. But our dorms are kind of like the Wild West. People bring all kinds of stuff and expect it all just to work, everything from smart light bulbs. We had some kind of, it was like a TP-Link or something. It was just crazy, some consumer-grade fan. And just everything is the quote-unquote smart home or smart device or this, that, and the other thing. And, they want to be connected to one router, and the only thing that's ever going to talk to it are the devices on that one router, the typical living room model, which the dorms are not. And then when you leave the dorms, every now and then, a faculty member, will have something that, they think would be really cool in the classroom, and it kind of bumps up against the same challenges. So it's fairly common on the classroom and administrative side of life. It's a little easier to deal with because typically you're working with, computing support people that can help you educate on policy and maybe help find alternative solutions to whatever they're trying to achieve. But certainly in the dorms where it's quote unquote their home, conversations get pretty interesting.
What were you hoping to accomplish with this? What kind of needle would you wish you could move?
Oh, in a perfect world, and if I were Cinderella, right up there with world peace,
Yeah.
somebody from the Wi-Fi Alliance would be sitting in the audience, and they would listen to me just go off for 30 minutes, and then they'd leave saying, we kind of failed. This whole notion of interoperability, we're really not delivering it. We really are just kind of awash in special sauce, and we need to reform this consumer space. By golly, I mean that's like the perfect world. But some of it is a sanity check. I can't be the only one dealing with this, and from the audience interaction and all of that, I don't think I am.
Yeah, what's some of the feedback you got? I mean, were you hearing like "Amen, brother," or "What are you, a crazy loon, conspiracy theorist?" or what was?
I think there was a lot of "Amen, brother." It kind of is what it is. I don't know how we're going to change it. A couple of allusions to magic in the middle, like Cisco has ICE and Aruba has ClearPass, and if you're willing to spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on what I call the magic in the middle, these quote unquote solutions, you can make that $20 streaming device work just fine. So like I say, it's really odd times.
Yeah.
You're going to spend six figures to make that Walmart $20 gadget that's so important to somebody actually work on the wireless network, instead of the company who made that device, make them kind of make it work on the network by building it right to begin with.
So, like in your view, with the Wi-Fi Alliance, if they were doing what you would expect them to do, they would have a stronger gate or a harder way to pass in to just get everything approved.
Yeah, that's a fair summary. I mean, their members are the companies that are making both sides of the wireless equation. They're the infrastructure makers, and they're also the client device makers. So, ideally, their members would kind of, in my mind, what I think of as doing the right thing, and that right thing is everybody becomes compatible with enterprise wireless, or the Wi-Fi Alliance comes out with their own, they're really good at branding and then marketing the hell out of their own brands. So something like this is a certified consumer device. This is a certified enterprise device with some pretty simple criteria would be all it would take. And then at least, wireless professionals would be able to take a device and say, well, that's been certified consumer. We just, that alone means we're not going to support it on our enterprise network.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that to me makes perfect sense. I've heard from other people that, boy, wouldn't that be nice? And, that would be another way of perhaps addressing, what wireless people see as a problem.
Where you could at least point to something for your C-levels or whomever you're answering to and say, this doesn't fit in our environment. And look.
Yeah, exactly. And then if the consumer folks actually wanted to sell into the enterprise space, they'd have to rethink their products and do the few lines of code that it would actually take to make them better. Everybody would have to stop applying their own little twist on things and actually be more adhesive to the standards and more embrace more the notion of there are business networks that are different than home networks.
You gave a couple examples. We referenced one where it had the note, don't use this device where you have wireless. And you said, who doesn't have wireless? You also talked about the 36-page configuration guide.
That was Cisco providing their configuration guide for the Google Chromecast.
That's right.
And the Chromecast is one of those consumer devices. It has a really, really particular pairing thing that has to happen up front that just does not work very well in the enterprise. Hats off to Cisco for going to the trouble of telling you how to make it work, but it does take 36 pages of configuration, getting you to do things to your wireless network that probably 95% of wireless network administrators and engineers look at and say, we can't do this. This makes no sense. This goes against security policy. This goes against stability. Nothing about this makes sense. But at least Cisco tells you how to do it in this very complicated world. So we talked about that. The other devices, the Lutron was actually a lighting system. They have a couple of different series of lighting systems. I'm not bashing Lutron wholesale because they also have some stuff that works out of Wi-Fi frequencies, wireless lighting control systems that are fantastic. They've got huge, big name customers, and you can find that on their website. The particular series I'm talking about is the Vive or Vive, V-I-V-E. And as you alluded to in their technical documents, they say, this is a Wi-Fi controlled system, or, this system works in Wi-Fi frequencies. Don't use it where you have Wi-Fi. And like you already said, who doesn't have Wi-Fi basically in a building nowadays? And that device comes up. Every lighting controller is basically a wireless access point, and it booms, and it will crush your high-density wireless environment in 2.4, and it'll stay booming until you plug in an Ethernet cable. There's no way to disable it until you do that. It's just one of those devices that, they completely missed the boat on putting it out there. And it's not like it says it on the packaging. Don't use where you have a Wi-Fi network. You have to dig deep into the configuration guides to get to that point. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. And then the infamous Big Ass Fans, legitimate company name. Got to be fun to put that in your signature block. Big Ass Fans. But anyhow, they at least had the good sense to kind of do the Lutron thing with an out for the Wi-Fi people. They also have a Bluetooth side of their wireless radio, and from Bluetooth underneath the fan, you can at least disable Wi-Fi. So that was nice to see. But it also goes back to my point of everybody's doing it their own way. There is no cohesive approach. There's no commonality across a lot of these devices, and you never know what you're going to get until you dig into the docs or until you set it up and see just how bad it really is.
You mentioned in your talk a few potential solutions or answers people have.
Yes, we talked about the magic in the middle, those very expensive systems, and they do have more use. These all fall under the heading of NAC, Network Access Control, and you can do more than just use them as like the magic Harry Potter sorting hat for all these crazy devices. But to get there, it's a lot of money to do these things. Back to my point where that falls down, or where that perhaps is defective, is the money you're putting into these systems to make these uber cheap devices. You're not even making them behave. You're basically making a nasty workaround. That's what you're doing by spending a boatload of money. And for a lot of us, especially, you think about what's going on with the pandemic and all of that. And, before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit about the economic impact. Budgets are going to be a lot tighter after this. So, the thought of spending that kind of money to accommodate cheap devices, it's not going to resonate very well with people in a lot of cases. So that, we're seeing current events kind of make a bad situation worse, I think. Creating the devices properly, recognizing that the consumer space is so much different from the enterprise space. And the differences are generally security, the funky multicast MDNS type stuff. MDNS, by definition, is made for small networks. It's multicast DNS is made for very small networks. These devices come to very large networks, and it doesn't scale well. It's hard to implement, and that gets back to Cisco's trying to give you this kludgy workaround for the Chromecast. That's one of those examples. If the device makers just acknowledged, we want people to be able to use these devices in these spaces, they have to adapt to the spaces, not vice versa. I mean, that would be a very powerful, simple recognition that's long overdue, in my opinion.
You had mentioned just do a PSK network.
Oh yeah, the notion of just kind of make a separate SSID, and then make that SSID just for these devices. The problem there is one of the problems there is updating keys can be terribly clunky. So how do you update keys on potentially hundreds of devices with any frequency? That can be quite hard. But then also in the device space, we ran into a particular time clock where one of the things that we were asked to do is not only create a PSK network for the clocks, but can you give each clock its own PSK network? So now, that gets embraced as a solution. If you know anything about wireless, you only want so many SSIDs out there, and you can picture the SSID sprawl if every goofy device and every individual device in the goofy device product set needs its own. It's just it's not sustainable or realistic either.
You mentioned the open network.
Oh yeah, which is actually something we took a chance on doing, and it's worked out very well for the last 3 years now. Rather than invest in the expensive magic in the middle, ice and ClearPass for this particular purpose, and we did give it a go, and it kind of failed miserably. The first 3 devices were misclassified and weren't given the right permissions, so we realized that we couldn't keep going with something like that. So we opted to create an open SSID in the dorms, and if you can get your device on it, you'll be allowed to get to the internet and nothing else. You can't get back to the important campus resources. And there's still some devices that's not good enough for, but that does capture and enable, a large percentage of the problem devices. But it means they can only get to the internet. So, kind of whether you call it a DMZ or you call it the segregated out Wild West or whatever, it's the same SSID per dorm, but behind it, it's much smaller logical slices. The SSID appears to be campus-wide, but it's actually chunked up per building. And a lot of the streaming devices, Roku's and Apple TVs, if you know how to hook it up the right way for this paradigm, we've been able to get all kinds of devices on that particular using that network, and that's worked out good for probably 75% of what everybody would like to use. As good as that sounds, you might be cringing about the security aspects, but I promise we satisfied our security officer and our CIO when we went down this path. Even there with the open network, there is one particular very popular funky colored light panel thing that the students like to buy. It only works in 2.4 gig. If it sees an SSID with the same name in 5 gig, it'll give you a warning. So somehow it can hear the 5 gig. It'll give you a warning that we don't want to be in this environment because there's a 5 gig network. We're only 2.4. It's like, okay, how about just ignoring it and using 2.4? It is the goofiest thing I've ever seen. But again, some developer somewhere in some third world country thought that was a good idea for some reason, and now we're all stuck trying to deal with that. So just one more example.
So if you could talk with the admin, C-level, what would be some things that you wish they could change or consider?
Oh, sure. So, we will try to find, ways to explain, just because it's wireless, that can mean a whole bunch of different things. Here's why it won't work. Here's the particular risk of, bending our own rules and accommodating that. Ideally, we can kind of keep all of that minimum and put a positive spin on it and, kind of come at it from what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Forget the device. What's the what's the operational thing you're trying to do, and find an alternative that actually works on the network. Usually, for every goofy device, there's one that does the same thing that you can make work properly. Not in all cases, but in most cases. So a lot of times, again, it's trying to find a viable alternative that actually does, what they were trying to do, even if it doesn't, even if it, maybe is a little more expensive or whatever. And a lot of bad press has been made about, wireless security and exploits being done, through, poor devices and poorly secured networks and all of that. It doesn't take a lot of persuasion to, as long as you've got a legitimate case, to explain why the security aspects are really important. And you can't just, shotgun in goofy stuff because it sounds cool and you can use it at home. And, the providing of alternative ways, like I said, is pretty powerful and kind of keeping the pace.
So talk to the engineer, someone who's in the middle, kind of maybe a similar situation. What encouragement or or advice maybe would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, make sure that your organization has an up-to-date wireless policy, not a network policy, not a security policy, a wireless specific policy that covers all of these situations and talks about who has final say, et cetera, and make sure that it is endorsed by the C levels and that it has some teeth. If you can achieve that, then, when it comes time to go have these sometimes spirited discussions, at least you've got the closest thing to law, as far as like from within your own little kingdom to refer to. And it's nothing that you beat people over the head with. It's just something you refer to help the discussion along. On top of that, by all means, don't make promises. Somebody says, "Hey, I want to put this on the network." Be thoughtful, be cautious. So yeah, we're going to have to maybe either try it out, digest the technical docs, see what it's all about, and possibly call the vendor if that's okay. If we can get your vendor contact, and if you don't have one, we'll figure out who to call and talk through it. Really, it's just kind of be cooperative. Don't rush into anything. And by the other side of the coin, you don't want to just hold up the stop sign every time and say no to everything, because that's not very endearing either. It's a minefield, and you have to walk it fairly often.
You wrapped up your talk with where is all of this going? Summarize it again for us, just where you see things are going, or what are the potential options that as you see them?
Well, I feel this tension between the consumer and the enterprise space, and it just seems almost like I don't even know what a good analogy would be. Call it rust, or call it, a plague of locusts, whatever. Something is just kind of swarming over the surface, and you can't fight it off. It kind of feels like that with the consumer devices sometimes. And sooner or later, something is going to have to give. So, will we be dumbing down the enterprise networks to accommodate all the consumer devices? That's a very viable option. Sooner or later, the balance tips, and we just can't keep making exceptions, and we can't keep, investing money on this expensive stuff in the middle. So, maybe we go back to just giant PSK environments or something. That is certainly one potential outcome I see coming, being kind of fatalistic. It can't be both ways forever. I know that with the number of devices that are coming. The other thing is maybe somebody will get wise and, as I alluded to before, realize it's time to reform the client device space, but I just don't see it coming. The Wi-Fi Alliance is the closest thing we have to, call it a lobbyist in that regard. And they just don't seem to care. In their early days, they were all about promoting, real interoperability, real quality, universally applied approaches to wireless. And now they just seem to be more interested in marketing themselves as much as anything. So I don't have a real positive hope for any of this actually resolving, but at the same time, I'm open-minded that maybe sooner or later a strong voice will come along and somehow fix it. It would be wonderful.
Lee, I do appreciate you, I guess, sounding the alarm again. And it seems like you're always on the forefront of at least openly sharing your thoughts and views and giving people something to think and chew on. So we appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Matthew. And I fully realize that even if a lot of people, well, let me find the right way to say it. I know I tend to grouse a lot, but at the same time, I very much know that other people kind of resign themselves to it. And I don't know. I don't want to go down without a fight.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.